The notice had been taped to the door with ordinary masking tape, the kind you use to label boxes before a move, the kind that peels away without leaving a mark. But the words underneath it left a mark that nothing could undo. Vacate by Friday. Nora stood on the landing of her apartment building holding Lily's hand, reading the notice twice, then a third time, as if the repetition might rearrange the letters into something kinder. Lily was 5, and she was quiet in the way that children become quiet when they sense something has shifted beneath the adults around them, something tectonic. Something they cannot name but can feel in the silence that follows a door closing. It was a Tuesday in early October. The trees along the street had begun their slow undressing. Leaves fell without ceremony. A man walked past below without looking up. The city went on, as it always does, indifferent to the specific weight of any one person's grief. Nora had been 3 months behind on rent. She had known this moment was coming. And still, seeing it written in bold, matter-of-fact type on a sheet of paper taped to her own door, her door, the door she had painted green herself with leftover paint from a different life, made it real in a way that knowing never quite does. She picked up Lily. She pressed her face into her daughter's hair. She stood there a long time before she went inside to pack. The shelter on Moore Street smelled of industrial cleaner and something beneath it, the residue of too many people sleeping too close together, each carrying their own invisible weight. Nora had been there 3 nights when the social worker called to tell her about the inheritance. She hadn't known Margaret Calloway. Not really. Margaret had been a great-aunt by marriage, her late father's aunt by his first marriage, a woman so far at the edge of the family tree that Nora had met her perhaps twice, both times at funerals. Both times briefly. She remembered a small woman with white hair and very green eyes and hands that were always slightly stained with something the color of earth or pollen. She remembered thinking the woman seemed content in a way that didn't require company. Margaret had died in September at 81, and she had left, in a handwritten will, a flower shop on Clement Street to Nora. Not to Nora's mother, who was living. Not to Nora's cousins, several of whom had been closer to Margaret in geography if not in feeling. To Nora. The will simply said her name, Nora Grace Pelham, and then the address, and then the words, she will know what to do with it. She is the kind of person who does. Nora read the legal document 3 times in the shelter's common room while Lily slept against her shoulder, and she felt many things at once. Gratitude that arrived too suddenly and therefore felt suspicious. Guilt, for reasons she couldn't fully explain. And something older, quieter, harder to name. The feeling of being thought of by someone who had no obligation to think of you at all. The shop had been closed for 2 years. The lawyer explained this over the phone in the measured tone of someone delivering information they know is complicated. Margaret's health had declined. There had been no one to run it. The lease was paid through the end of the year, which gave Nora time. The inventory was gone, mostly. The equipment was dated. But the space was hers. Nora took Lily on the bus to Clement Street on a Thursday morning. The fog was still thick at 11 o'clock, the way it often is in that part of the city, sitting low and quiet over the buildings like something waiting to be asked a question. The shop was between a Vietnamese restaurant and a dry cleaner. Its sign read Calloway's in faded yellow letters on a green background. The window was filmed with dust. Through it, Nora could see the ghost of what the space had once been. The hooks where hanging baskets had lived, the long wooden counter along the back wall. The metal shelving still standing like an empty skeleton of industry. She stood outside for a long time. Lily pressed her face against the glass and breathed a circle of fog onto it. Is this ours? Lily asked. I think so, Nora said. It smells like outside, Lily said. Nora put the key in the lock. It turned with the specific heaviness of something that hasn't moved in a long time. Not stuck, exactly, just reluctant, like a person who has grown used to being closed. Inside, the air was cold and still and carried exactly the smell Lily had described. Not flowers, not exactly, but something beneath flowers. The memory of them. The ghost of growth. Soil and green and the faint sweetness of something that had once been alive here and was now only present in the walls, in the wood. In the particular quality of the air that hadn't been disturbed in 2 years. Nora walked to the center of the room. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry, and also too relieved. And the two things together produced a kind of stillness inside her that felt almost like peace. Almost. Over the first 2 weeks, Nora cleaned. This was not a metaphor, though it became one over time. She cleaned in the most literal sense. She swept decades of dust from corners. She wiped down the shelving with vinegar and water. She scrubbed the wooden counter until its original grain appeared. Pale and warm and surprisingly beautiful. She borrowed a mop from the dry cleaner next door, a man named Henry who was 70 and quiet, and brought her tea twice without being asked. She had taken what small amount of savings she had, the last of a tax refund, a loan from her friend Paulette that Paulette called a gift and Nora called a loan, and she used it carefully, buying cleaning supplies and a second-hand cot and a small heater. The shelter had given her a 30-day extension while she worked to make the space habitable. She and Lily slept in the back room of the shop on the cot and 2 sleeping bags. And in the mornings, Lily woke up and immediately went to press her face against the cold glass of the front window to watch the street begin its day. This became a ritual between them. Nora would make tea on a small electric burner. Lily would report on the street. The man in the blue coat who walked a large brown dog. The woman who jogged every day with her hair in an increasingly complex braid. The delivery trucks that backed up too far and then recovered. "The flower lady is here," Lily announced one morning, pointing. Nora looked. Across the street, there was a woman selling cut flowers from a cart, dahlias, mostly, and some kind of mum in deep burgundy. She was perhaps 50, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this so many times that it lived in her body now, not her mind. Nora watched her for a long time. She had worked in offices for most of her adult life. Data entry, then admin work, then a position at a small insurance company where she had been, by all accounts, careful and reliable and easy to overlook. She had been let go 18 months ago in a restructuring, and the 18 months after that had been a slow, careful erosion of everything she had built. First the savings, then the credit, then the apartment. She did not know flowers. She had never grown anything. But she had, as a child, loved them with the specific unreasonable love that children direct at beautiful things before they learn to be practical. She found Margaret's records in a cardboard box on the highest shelf in the back room. Receipts, supplier contacts, pricing sheets, a handwritten inventory log that went back 15 years. The handwriting was precise and slightly old-fashioned, with long descenders and very even spacing. A person who had been taught penmanship and took it seriously. Nora sat on the floor with the box and read for hours while Lily drew on the backs of old receipt paper with a red crayon. She learned things about Margaret that she had not known. That she had kept the shop open 6 days a week for 31 years. That she had had a preference for seasonal, locally grown flowers and a noted distaste for anything dyed or artificially preserved. That she had done, on average, 2 or 3 custom arrangements per week for repeat clients, a restaurant, a small hotel. A family who seemed to order flowers for every occasion and several non-occasions. She found notes in the margins of some receipts. Not business notes. Small observations. Peonies are late this year. Mrs. Huang came in for the 3rd time this month. She doesn't say why. I think she just needs somewhere to be. And another, a man today who didn't know what his wife liked. We talked for an hour. He left with sweet peas. I think he knew her better than he thought. These notes opened something in Nora that the legal documents had not. She began to understand, slowly, what the shop had been. It was Lily who found the door. This was, in retrospect, inevitable. Children find things because they are still close to the ground, still curious without strategy, still moving through spaces without the filtering instinct that adults develop, the unconscious deletion of what doesn't seem immediately relevant. The door was in the back corner of the storage room, behind a tall wooden shelving unit that held nothing now but dust and 3 ceramic pots with hairline cracks. The unit was heavy enough that it had never been moved during Nora's cleaning. She had wiped around it, vaguely aware that it was blocking something but distracted by more immediate concerns. Lily was playing one afternoon while Nora made calls to flower suppliers. The child moved behind the shelving unit to retrieve a crayon that had rolled there, and came back with the crayon and a piece of information. "There's a door back there," she said. Nora said, on hold with a distributor. "It has a lock," Lily said. "A big one." Nora finished her call and went to look. The shelving unit moved with effort. She had to empty it first and pull it from the bottom, the legs scraping against the concrete floor in a sound that seemed too loud for the quiet room. Behind it was a door. Wooden, painted the same green as the front door, with a padlock through a heavy iron latch. The lock was old but solid. No rust, no weakness, the kind of lock that was bought to last. Nora tried every key on the ring the lawyer had given her. None fit. She stood in front of the locked door for a long moment, and felt the particular sensation of encountering something that resists you, not hostility, exactly, but a kind of patience. The door had been waiting here, behind the shelving unit, for at least 2 years. Possibly longer. It was in no hurry. She put the shelving unit back. She made dinner. She put Lily to bed. But she found herself returning to think about the door in the small hours of the night. Lying awake with Lily's warm weight against her side and the city making its distant sounds outside the fogged window. Margaret had left this place to her deliberately. The will had said so with a clarity that was unusual for legal language. She will know what to do. The woman had stained hands and green eyes, and she had spent 31 years in this room giving people flowers they needed. She had taken notes in margins. She had noticed the woman who came back 3 times without saying why. She had been, Nora thought, someone who paid attention. And someone who pays attention does not forget to tell you where they've put the key. Nora went back through the cardboard box the next morning with different eyes. She had read the business records. She had not read everything. There were letters in the bottom of the box, bundled with a rubber band that had dried to brittleness and broke when she touched it. She had set these aside, feeling that they were private in a way that supplier receipts were not. She read them now. They were not letters Margaret had received. They were letters Margaret had written, or rather, drafts of letters, some finished and some not, all in the same careful handwriting, all addressed to people whose full names Nora did not know. There was one addressed simply to Nora. She sat with it in her hands for a long time before she opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten on the same pale green paper that the shop's receipts had been printed on. A stock that must have been ordered by the gross because there was still a half ream of it on the shelf above the box. Margaret wrote the way she seemed to have thought, directly, without ornament, but not without feeling. She wrote that she had followed Nora's life at a distance for many years. That her late husband, Nora's great-uncle Edward, had spoken of Nora's father with great sadness after the estrangement, and that after Edward died. Margaret had made a quiet habit of keeping track of those her husband had loved and lost touch with. Not intrusively. Just watching. The way you watch weather from a window. She wrote that she had seen, from a distance, that Nora was the kind of person who holds things together without being thanked for it. The kind who absorbs difficulty quietly. Who does not ask for help because asking feels like failure, and who has learned this lesson from people who were wrong to teach it. She wrote that the shop was not a gift, precisely. It was an attempt at making right what time had made wrong. She wrote, "Your father and my Edward should not have lost each other. I don't know how to fix that. But I can give you something that meant something to me, and trust that you will understand why." And then, on the 3rd page, near the end, the key to the basement is in the blue tin on the windowsill of the back room. I kept it there because I always meant to go back down and I always found a reason not to. You won't have that reason. Nora looked up. There was a blue tin on the windowsill. She had noticed it before and assumed it was decorative, or empty, or full of old rubber bands. She had cleaned around it. She stood. She crossed the room. She picked up the tin. Inside was a small brass key and a folded piece of paper that said, in Margaret's handwriting, "The basement grew things once. Maybe it can again." The key fit. The lock opened with the specific give of old machinery that was well made. Not the grinding of rust but the smooth rotation of something built before obsolescence was planned into objects. Built to last beyond its owner. The door swung inward. Below, a set of wooden stairs descended into darkness. Nora found a light switch just inside the door, a round ceramic one, old enough to be beautiful, and when she pressed it, the basement filled with light. She stood at the top of the stairs for a long moment. Then she went down. The basement was larger than she had expected. It ran the full length of the shop above it, and this was the thing that stopped her at the bottom of the stairs and held her in place for a moment that stretched. It was prepared. Not abandoned. Not emptied. Prepared. Along the left wall were deep wooden shelving units fitted with grow lights, older models, fluorescent, but functional. They were not on, but when Nora found the second switch, they hummed to life and cast their blue-white light across the space. The shelves were empty, but they were clean. They had been wiped down. Beneath each shelf was a series of shallow trays, the kind used for seedlings, stacked and waiting. Along the right wall, soil. Bags of it, stacked carefully, a dozen bags of growing medium, a smaller number of perlite and compost, all sealed. Beside them, a wooden crate containing seed packets, bundled by type and labelled in Margaret's handwriting. Annuals. herbs. And then, separately bundled and labeled more carefully, the difficult ones. Ranunculus, hellebore, sweet peas. In the center of the room, a long work table. On the work table, a notebook. Nora sat at the table and opened the notebook. It was part record book and part instruction manual and part something else entirely, part testament. Margaret had written, over what appeared to be several years, a complete guide to growing cut flowers in the specific conditions of this basement. Temperature, humidity, lighting schedule, watering frequency, soil ratios. She had noted which varieties had thrived and which had struggled and why. She had noted failure honestly and without self-pity. The first ranunculus didn't come up. I think the temperature dropped too fast in February. I've put a note here about the heating. And beside the technical notes, the other kind. This basement is what made the shop possible before the shop could support itself. I grew here for 4 years before I could afford to buy wholesale consistently. I grew here through a bad winter when I couldn't afford fuel and the plants kept going anyway because they wanted to. I have been growing here less and less as my hands have gotten worse. I don't want to stop, but I can feel that I am stopping. I hope whoever comes here next understands that this is not just a storage room. It is a beginning room. It is where things are before they are anything. Lily had come part way down the stairs and was now standing at the bottom, looking around with the focused calm that children use when they encounter something they instinctively understand is important. It smells like dirt, she said. It does, Nora said. I like it, Lily said. She walked to the work table and climbed onto the stool beside Nora and looked at the notebook. What's that? Instructions, Nora said. For what? Nora looked around the room. At the lights waiting to be turned on. At the seeds waiting in their paper packets. At the bags of soil patient against the wall. At the trays, empty and ready, stacked in the clean organization of someone who had prepared this for someone they trusted would come. For starting, she said. Nora did not rush. This was the most important thing, and she understood it in her body before she understood it in her mind. The basement had been waiting. The seeds had been waiting. Everything here had been organized around the principle of patience, the patience of growing things, which is the most honest kind of patience because it does not perform itself. A seed does not announce its waiting. It simply waits until it is ready, and then it acts. She spent a week reading the notebook before she touched anything else. She read it the way she had read Margaret's business records, carefully, returning to passages, sitting with the parts she didn't fully understand yet. She ordered nothing new. She bought nothing. She simply read and absorbed and let the knowledge settle into her in the way that real knowledge does, gradually, without fanfare. Lily helped in the way that 5-year-olds help, with enormous enthusiasm and imprecision and occasional accidental brilliance. She carried the seedling trays with more seriousness than she carried most things. She watched the seeds go in and asked questions at a rate that Nora could not fully keep up with. Why do they go in the dark first? Because that's how it works. They need to feel safe before they open. Lily thought about this. Like how I need the nightlight. Exactly like that, Nora said. The first seeds went in November. By December, there were small green threads of life in the trays. Nora watched them appear with a feeling she couldn't quite name. Something adjacent to wonder but more grounded than wonder. Something that acknowledged both the smallness of what she was seeing and its absolute non-smallness at the same time. She was not open yet. She had told no one she was here, mostly. Henry from the dry cleaner knew. Paulette knew. The lawyer knew. But the shop was dark from the street, its sign unchanged, its windows still faintly fogged. Nora was not ready for the outside yet, and the shop, she felt, understood this. She found, in the notebook, a section near the back that was different in tone from the rest, quieter and more personal. It was dated 4 years before Margaret died, and it read like someone organizing their thoughts for an audience they were not certain would materialize. I have thought a great deal about who to leave this to. Not who would run it best. I am not certain I can know that. But who would understand it. There is a difference between running a thing and understanding it. You can run a thing without knowing why it matters. But you cannot sustain a thing without that knowledge. The shop has sustained itself for so long because I have always known why it matters. It matters because people need beauty at the moments when they least expect to need it. They think they are buying flowers for a birthday or an apology or a sympathy. But what they are really doing is acknowledging that the person they are buying for is worth a living thing. That is not small. Nora Pelham. I have watched her at a distance. I do not know her life well enough to know if I am right. But I believe she understands, or could understand, if given the chance, that some things of value that cannot be counted. I hope I am not wrong about her. I do not think I am. Nora read this passage twice and then sat with the notebook closed on her knees and did not move for a long time. She thought about her father, who had been estranged from his family for most of Nora's life over something that everyone had since forgotten the specific details of. She thought about how estrangements work, how they feel, to the person inside them, like principled firmness, and how they look, from the outside, like waste. All that time. All those years when people who might have been present were absent instead. She thought about Margaret, who had lost her husband Edward and then spent years quietly watching the people Edward had loved, from a distance. In the way that you keep a candle burning in a room where someone used to sit. She thought about the basement. About the years Margaret had grown things down there before the shop could sustain itself. For years, the notebook said. For years of descending the stairs in the morning and tending to small green things in the dark, and no one above on the street would have known. No one passing the closed front window would have seen. The growing had been invisible. This was what moved her most, finally. Not the gift itself. Not even the letter. But the image of Margaret in this basement, alone with her seeds and her grow lights and her careful notebook, sustaining something through the years before it could sustain itself, doing it quietly. Doing it without an audience, doing it because she understood that things need time in the dark before they are ready for the light. Nora had been given something. But she had also been shown something. She had been shown what patient, invisible effort looks like. What it produces. How far it reaches. By February, the first ranunculus came up. She called Lily down to see. They crouched together in front of the tray, Lily in her pajamas, both of them close to the floor. And they looked at the small curled fist of green pushing up through the dark soil toward the artificial light. It worked, Lily whispered. It worked, Nora said. Will it be a flower? Eventually. When? Nora thought of Margaret's notebook. Thought of the 4 years. Thought of the letter on pale green paper and the brass key in the blue tin and the shelving unit that had been moved in front of a door. Not to hide it, but to leave it waiting. To leave it for someone who would move the shelf when the time was right. When it's ready, she said. Not before. The shop opened in April. Nora did not do it with ceremony. She turned on the lights and unlocked the front door and stood behind the wooden counter, and the fog was still on the street. And Henry from the dry cleaner came and bought a small bunch of sweet peas, and he didn't say much. Just nodded at her in the way that people who have witnessed difficulty nod when they see it transform. Lily had made a sign for the window in red crayon on the back of an old receipt. Open. Flowers. We grew them. Nora left it there. The ranunculus had bloomed first, then the sweet peas, then the hellebore. Some things had not come up and some things had come up differently than expected, looser, or more vivid, or at the wrong time. This is how growing works. You follow the instructions you have been given and then the living thing makes its own adjustments, because living things do not read notebooks. People came in the way people come into small shops on quiet streets, tentatively at first, then with more ease. A woman who needed something for a friend. A man who stood in front of the counter for a long time not saying what the flowers were for, and Nora did not ask. Because Margaret's notes had taught her that sometimes people just need somewhere to be. She thought of Margaret every day. Not with grief, or not only with grief, but with the steady, orienting feeling of someone who has been given a direction to face. She thought of her when she descended to the basement in the early mornings. When she opened the notebook to a new section she hadn't read yet. When she watched a customer leave with a bunch of flowers pressed to their chest, not looking where they were going, looking inward. What Margaret had done, the decades of it, the patience of it, the quiet watching from a distance. The preparation of a basement in a city and the leaving of a key in a blue tin, none of it had been visible while it was happening. No one had been there to see it accumulate. It had been the kind of effort that doesn't announce itself, because announcing is not why it's done. That is the most important kind of effort. It is the kind that costs the most and asks the least in return and reaches the farthest. It is the kind that a 5-year-old discovers behind a shelving unit with a crayon in her hand. It is the kind that waits, in the dark, patient and prepared, until the right person arrives with the right key. Nora thought sometimes about all the locked basements she had walked past in her life without knowing. All the effort that had been laid down, quietly, by people who were watching from a distance with no obligation and every intention. How much of what we receive was prepared for us long before we knew we would need it? And she thought, what am I growing now, in the dark, that someone I may never meet will one day find? Because some people don't build things to see them finished. They build them to be found.